Congratulations to Charles Leclerc on a beautifully judged win at Spa, full of poise, full of confidence, never more so I think than we saw at the start of the race when on the pole for the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, 24 hours after he'd lost a close friend, Antoine Hubert, in the Formula 2 race. A lot of pressure on Charles, and yet he made the perfect start. Straight away off the line, great reaction, no wheel spin, looked great, and then at the perfect moment just moved to the left just to make sure that Sebastian Vettel, who he knew was somewhere on his outside, wasn't going to do anything. He just closed the door a little bit on the outside for Sebastian and then braked pretty hard just to show who was boss. That of course allowed Lewis up down the inside of Sebastian, but it gave Charles the perfect rotation and then the exit from La Source to take the lead into Eau Rouge and then up the straight. Wonderful bit of driving. Looked like a driver who'd been winning Grand Prix for many years. Perfect judgment of everything he did, and thereafter of course the race fell into place for him. It wasn't an easy race in terms of time management, particularly in the second phase of the race, and that's really where Charles showed his class alongside Sebastian. So if we're going to talk about Charles' first win, of course we have to put it in the context of Michael Schumacher also scoring his first Grand Prix win at Spa, and Jim Clark as well back in 1962. But for Charles also there was a big double whammy, and that was the way he beat his teammate Sebastian Vettel, who had a very, very quick car all day. We shouldn't play too lightly with this because bear in mind Vettel's experience, Vettel's knowledge of Formula One in general, 4 World Championships, and Charles made him look like, well, dare I say it, a number 2 driver yet again. And we've been saying for a couple of years that Charles is a class act, so let's just reiterate that and do it in the context of Sebastian Vettel's comments after the race as to why his car was suffering much more with tyre degradation than Charles, something he said that he and the engineers were going to have to look at before the Italian Grand Prix at Monza this weekend. Well, the news is, Sebastian, that it is the way you drive, and it's also the way that Charles drives his car. And if you want to have proof of that, look at the initial steering input of Charles going into Pouin and also actually going into Les Combes at the end of the straight. You can see just on that one little movement that it's almost seamless for Charles, and for Sebastian there is a slight jink. You may think it's a very, very small difference, but these are the differences, the analog grey bit in between. So if it's happening there, of course there's a lot of other stuff going on as well, particularly with footwork, and we can't see any of that with any of the coverage we get of Formula One these days. But you can be sure that in terms of throttle and brake application, it is the same thing with Charles Leclerc versus Sebastian Vettel. So if Sebastian is going to take the fight to Charles, he's going to have to improve in those areas. This is something we've been saying ever since he got blown away by Daniel Ricciardo at Red Bull, and he hasn't worked on them. And it's much the same story, you could say, for Fernando Alonso when he went to McLaren and immediately assumed there was something wrong with the brakes on his car because Lewis was able to do a better job under high-speed braking. And so it goes on. Some drivers will learn from their mistakes. Some drivers will improve constantly, like Lewis Hamilton. Other drivers stay in a rut and just believe that it cannot be them. It must be the team. Having said all of that, I do think that Sebastian is probably going to have a very good race at Monza because, well, dare I say it, there aren't as many corners at Monza. Yes, the Parabolica will be a pretty demanding corner in terms of tyre deg, and I guess the Lesmos too, but Lesmo 1 these days not that demanding. So I think he'll be a lot closer to Charles around Monza, could easily beat Charles around Monza, as indeed, well, Fernando did with Lewis Hamilton in that year at McLaren. So excellent performance from Charles, below par obviously by Sebastian Vettel. He did play the team game when he was told to slow down. You could at least give him that, so that will earn him some points at Ferrari. Brilliant drive too, I thought, from Lewis Hamilton in a car that was much slower on the straights. Sometimes at Spa, as we've seen with Red Bull in the past, when you have pace in Sector 2 at Spa, you can really get it together for a race, and Lewis almost did that. And just think about that. Think about the fact that it took Charles Leclerc to beat Mercedes at Spa, and if Ferrari was still running, say, Sebastian Vettel and Kimi Raikkonen, I dare say we would be celebrating right now another Lewis Hamilton victory at Spa, and Mercedes would be saying, wow, against all odds we won the Belgian Grand Prix. But with Charles Leclerc there, they did get the maximum from the Ferrari. So very good drive from Lewis. A more emotional driver than most out of the car, I think. I think he would have been feeling really upset before this race. So a really good drive from Lewis Hamilton and a good backup performance from Valtteri Bottas, who backed away towards the end of the race, obviously to save the engine and so forth, because he was never going to do anything better than P3 once Sebastian had made his second pit stop. from Valtteri now, I think you'll see some very good performances. He knows what he's doing next year, the pressure's off, he knows he's a Mercedes driver, and that always brings out the best in any racing driver, let alone a guy like Valtteri, who will put his head down now, work very closely with the team. So expect Valtteri to win a race or two before the end of the year. Driver of the day has to be, of course, Charles Leclerc, but I would say a very, very good second best to that would be Alex Albon's superb performance in the Red Bull after Max and Kimi Raikkonen had their shunt at the first corner. Everything we expected of Alex, really. I still can't believe that Red Bull signed him and saw how good he was and put that together. Great news for everybody in Formula One that he is there at Red Bull, and wonderful to see a driver of that quality being rewarded with a car of that quality. As for the shunt between Max and Kimi, well, I think, it's interesting, isn't it? Probably Kimi was thinking only of making sure Sergio Perez didn't do anything silly going into the first corner, so he was defending to the left, and once he'd done that, he figured the corner was his. Of course, Max never gives up. He'd made a slow start, and I guess Kimi hadn't really figured that in. He was down the inside. I would give that a 50-50. A bit surprising that Max continued and had the shunt at Eau Rouge. Probably the steering arm broke when he applied load in the middle of Eau Rouge, so we shouldn't give him too hard a time about that. Good to see him walk away from that, obviously. And as for Kimi and Max in general, yeah, they've had their incidents before at Spa, haven't they, in Max's first year in Formula One. So I guess for another reason, Max probably thought, oh, well, I've done it to Kimi once, he'll probably let me have a bit of room again. Well, not on this time, Max, I'm afraid. Anyway, big disappointment for the huge Dutch crowd, but they've had their fun this year so far in Formula One, and no doubt there'll still be a lot more to come from young Max Verstappen. Off to Monza on Wednesday. Talk to you then.